It's recording now. Hello, Alex, again. Thanks for accepting my invitation. It's so great to have you on my YouTube channel.
Oh, thank you so much for the invitation. It's great to be here.
I loved your book so much. I'm trying to get it published in Turkey as well.
Wow, thank you.
It really spoke to me, and you had such an interesting voice, and it was such an interesting approach to the whole identity issue. So first of all, thanks for writing it. And I'd like to start with a brief introduction of introducing you, because our Turkish audience might not know you. So I'm joined by Alexander Douglas today to discuss his new book, Against Identity. And he's a philosopher. He's a professor of philosophy at the University of St. Andrews, where he specializes in the history of philosophy and economics. While his previous work has focused on metaphysics of Spinoza and the nature of depth, which we'll get into soon. This latest book marks a deeply personal departure. Alex was born in Australia to a multi-ethnic family, and he has lived across 4 different continents. And he describes himself as a cultural outsider. And in Against Identity, he argues that this feeling of not belonging isn't a problem to be solved, but a form of liberation. And he weaves together 3 unlikely thinkers in his book. And he suggests that our modern obsession with finding ourselves is actually a trap. And he argues that identity is not the source of our happiness, but the root of our anxiety, polarization, and conflict. So first of all, what I loved the most about this book is how it completely ignores these rigid boundaries of modern academia, specifically the divide between analytical and continental schools. I studied at the University of Manchester, by the way, and I was very frustrated by how geographically determined our curriculum was. So I think it was a very refreshing approach. And you weave together a conversation between Zhuangzi'yi, Spinoza, and Girard, different geographies, different times, so multicultural. And what gave you the confidence to bypass those traditional academic? You need more of this borderless philosophy to truly understand human problems like identity.
Well, thank you so much for that beautifully clear summary of my book. I couldn't have done better myself. And I'm so glad that you notice this thing that I was trying to show more than say, which is that philosophy needs to break out of these silos. These kind of, arbitrary boundaries that we've drawn all over a discipline, which stands to gain nothing from that. Because, as I said in an interview with a student magazine, there's this image in the trancer of the sound that the wind makes as it blows through all the different hollows, all the kind of pipes and hollows in nature. There's this kind of chorus of sound. And to me, that's philosophy. Philosophy should be finding everything, every way of thinking, every perspective, any approach, any individual experience that could be relevant to making sense out of the human experience shouldn't be thrown aside. So why we would want to, silo ourselves up into these camps, I don't think I've ever understood. But as you say, it took a lot of confidence to be able to just ignore these boundaries, as I really tried to do in the book. I really tried to write both from a kind of global perspective. I tried to pick examples from, all over the world, different sort of cultural experiences and lives, because I'm aware of how easy, I'm sure that I nevertheless was biased, but I'm sure, I'm aware of how easy it is to write about your own situation as if it's a universal situation. So I tried very hard to stretch to places and things that I don't normally spend my time thinking about. But in terms of the approach to philosophy, kind of giving up on whether I was doing history of philosophy or analytic philosophy or continental philosophy, or whether this is, sort of comparative philosophy or East Asian philosophy or European philosophy. I think I made a choice at some point that either I can kind of try to argue against the way that academics make these distinctions, in which case you're sort of affirming them just by arguing against them, or maybe I thought I can just ignore them. I guess, you know, having a contract with a popular author like Penguin allowed me to just think, well, they don't care about any of this stuff. They just, you know, they just want to sell books. So that opened a whole world of possibility to me.
Yeah. That's actually a really nice segue to my follow-up question. What was the most difficult part of unlearning your academic training to write in this lyrical, narrative, accessible style? Was difficult for you because you're an academic, you're a professional philosopher. So did you feel a tension between maintaining a philosophical rigor and ensuring accessibility or readability?
There was an awful lot to unlearn. I was so fortunate to have an editor. I mean, one of the most sort of life-changing experiences was having an editor to help me, you know, push in exactly the opposite direction to what peer reviewers in academia do. You know, peer reviewers in academia are always trying to make you more academic, right? So more footnotes, more citations, more justification for this point, you know, batter the reader harder with more arguments, make it more unrelenting in the kind of attempt to convince. But, you know, with the editor, you have, I was constantly being told, no, you know, you don't have to make so many apologies. That was one thing that got taken out. You know, I kept sort of saying, I'm not an expert on this. I don't know about that. And, you know, undid a lot of that sort of internal critic. And but to answer your question, the hardest thing was I was invited to be more personal. So the first draft of this I wrote, I didn't really say anything about my personal story. And my editor told me, rightly, you have to connect with the reader. They have to know the voice that they're speaking to, you know. Unlike they don't care about your credentials. They don't care about, you know, how many sources you can cite. They want to know you. And I felt deeply uncomfortable about that to begin with. You know, I'm not used to kind of revealing myself that way.
Well, the story about your dad's condition was very touching. So I hope it was real and it wasn't something that you made up.
Oh, very real. No, very real, but just difficult to, you know, write down. But I'm very glad that I did, and I've had this amazing experience since writing the book that, you know, people have contacted me from all kind of walks of life saying that they connected with those things. Of course, you know, my story is not unique in that respect. So, yeah, it was great advice, and I'm glad I pushed through my initial terror.
Intellectual humility.
Yeah.
It's a curse.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's funny because you learn one sort of humility as an academic, and then in doing that, you lose other sorts of humility. You learn this kind of intellectual humility that you can't say anything without being able to, you know, substantiate it, and that you have to make arguments for everything you say. But you lose humility in the sense that you will never surrender control to the reader. You have to always kind of maintain complete control over what the reader is going to think. And so giving that up, you know, that also was both unnerving and liberating, I think.
You bring together three different thinkers, as I already mentioned. Zhuangziyi, which I have an interest in Eastern philosophy, so that's what it first brought me to your book. Zhuangziyi, Spinoza, which I know you're an expert of and you have this passion for. And I watched your other interviews as well, and I've seen how highly speak of Spinoza. And there's this thing about Spinoza experts. For some reason, they always love Spinoza so much. This is my humble observation.
It's true. Yeah.
And René Girard. How did you pick these three philosophers, and what each of these philosophers bring to the table, and what do they mean for you? Why did you pick these three?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just as an aside, you're absolutely right about Spinoza scholars. Probably kind of almost almost inappropriate fandom, for Spinoza. The only group that's worse is Kant scholars, I think. Like Kant scholars have a religious attachment to Kant.
I don't deal with them, so and I'm happy not to interact with them. Spinoza scholars are okay.
Yeah, no, but so the way I came to these three thinkers, I was talking through ideas with the commissioning editor for Penguin, and I kept proposing things that I thought would, kind of make sense with popular audiences, and they weren't going down very well. And eventually she said, look, if you could write anything you wanted, what would it be? If you could just write about anything you wanted. And I said, well, it's going to be too weird. And she said, try me. And I said, I'd like to write a book about these three figures, but I don't think there's any audience for combining these three. And she said, why? And I had to really think about it. And I think I hadn't really articulated in my mind why, but it's because I think they all basically have the same idea. There are lots and lots of traditions that criticize the idea of the self, or criticize the idea of, having an identity. Sort of innate identity. But these three all say something beyond that, which is that we derive our idea of our identity by imitating others. That our sense of identity is derived externally. I think that's such a fascinating thought, and I hadn't really found it elsewhere. And to be honest, I've been reading these three figures for a long time and not thinking about why I was so particularly drawn to all three of them. They just appealed to me. And I just felt like for some reason they all just really, really appealed to me. So at least I'm different from other Spinoza scholars in that I'm willing to be, attached to. I'm polyamorous or something with my historical. But the I mean, it only recently occurred to me they almost form a kind of trinity in my mind. That they kind of that they have three completely different ways of trying to access the same thought. At least that's how it appears to me.
When I was reading it, I thought maybe there could be three more philosophers that you could have include maybe. Buddha, I'm sure you thought of it as well. Schopenhauer and Lacan.
Right. Okay, explain.
Well, Schopenhauer and Buddha they're kind of against identity as well. Like Schopenhauer takes it from Buddhism, but Lacan and René Girard and Spinoza just there's a resonance between the themes of Lacan's how desire is not satisfiable and it's never reachable kind of thing, and we are desiring the desire of others, objepatia and stuff like that. So I thought maybe for a second book.
Well, this is very helpful, because I sometimes think about, if I were to do this kind of thing again. I have been asked, what other figures could I bring in? I think those are great suggestions. Lacan for sure, because he directly says that desire is always a desire of another. So yeah. I mean,
maybe Girard took it from Lacan. I don't know. Maybe
Girard was at one point asked about this, I think, and he said he didn't get it from Lacan, but he definitely, appreciated the resonance between the two approaches. I think that the relationship to Christianity is so different in both cases. That's interesting. It's interesting that from kind of such different perspectives they managed to converge. Yeah.
And it was a very interesting coincidence, or I don't know, more than a coincidence, that Peter Thiel is a PhD advisee of René Girard, right?
I think he took some classes with him. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how Instagram and Facebook works on very Girardian principles. It was interesting. So identity is primary currency of political discourse nowadays, at least. And the left often focuses of identity in terms of justice, representation, minority rights. The right focuses on national or traditional identity. By attacking the concept of identity itself, do you risk alienating both sides? Was this intentional? Or do you see your ideal reader as someone who's maybe apolitical? How do you think being political and having no identity go together?
I think that, that's probably the audience that I've had the most trouble with, including among my friends, who feel, on one hand, the force of some of the philosophical insights that I was bringing from these three figures against the idea of identity, but on the other hand, of course, feel this attachment to a kind of political identity. And often I've had arguments with people where they say, well, it's not an identity. My politics are not an identity. To me, the difficulty is, all three of these figures, I'm suggesting they all have a thought that desire is what they call metaphysical, that our desire is first and foremost to be something, and everything else gets layered on top of that. So I guess in a way I'm saying it's impossible for your politics not to be whatever else it is, an identity. There's some part of you that, wants to be the sort of person who holds a particular kind of value or has a particular belief. And there's nothing explicit, there's nothing directly wrong with that. It's just that when you're in the position of having to defend a certain notion of yourself, it becomes extremely dangerous. Because, Spinoza says somewhere that the mind strives to only imagine those things that affirm its power of acting or posit its power of acting or something like that. Meaning, once you have a notion of what you are, you can't help but see the world in ways that confirm that idea, and just kind of let things that don't confirm that idea drift into your blind spots, drift into the periphery of your vision. So politics, I think, is just extremely dangerous and volatile. And it does worry me, I think, that politics has come to play such a dominant role in our culture. No particular element of culture is dangerous in itself, but when it becomes kind of hegemonic. So, religion, not dangerous in itself, but when religion becomes hegemonic, the way that it was in many cultures for many years, that's problematic. Everything has to be kind of cashed out in religious terms. If every conflict, people's intermarital arguments have to be cashed out in terms of providence, and so I feel like the same thing just kind of plays out with politics in our age. But of course, at the end of the book, I said something like, I believe we've barely learned to live in the world together. So in a sense, the ambition is political. So we have to find a way to engage with each other, to live alongside each other. Of course, that is politics, but conducted without identity, or without identity playing the kind of role that it currently does, it would look very different.
In a positive way.
I hope so, yeah.
I was a guest on someone else's podcast. It was by a clinical psychologist, and she talks about finding ourselves, knowing ourselves, knowing what we want, etc., and all of these things that I kind of against. I challenge these ideas, and I know you do too from your book. And I was quoting your book when I was the guest, and she hit me back with this argument. And now I want to ask you this question that she asked me on her show. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
So there's this research on big five personality traits and the science of self in modern psychology. Maybe you've heard. And this personality model strongly suggests that we do have an essential self, especially some traits like conscientiousness and extroversion are heritable and remarkably stable over a lifetime. And if science tells us that we are hardwired with a specific temperament, isn't identity a factual description of that wiring? How do you reconcile the scientific evidence for a stable essential self with your philosophical argument?
Oh, thank you for that. It's a good argument.
Yeah.
But it hangs on what I mean by identity. And to be honest, I've had arguments of this form put to me about lots of different things. You know, are you denying the existence of ethnicity? Are you denying the existence of sexuality? Are you denying the existence? Well, you know, people define themselves by many, many different things, by their occupations, by their religious affiliations, by their politics, by their personality traits. But the question is not about whether these things are real or not. You know, I don't get into those questions. The question is whether, even if they're real, do they really fundamentally define you? Mm-hmm. The reason I started with the story about my father is because when you witness somebody kind of going very slowly through these stages of degeneration, where all the sort of recognizable attributes are kind of stripped away, including eventually, you know, elements of personality and temperament. You know, my father's, you know, his sense of humor was so kind of fundamental to my notion of what he was. And of course, he lost that very slowly. I mean, it's amazing how long that lasted. That kind of outlast language, you know, after he was no longer able to form coherent sentences. Still, sometimes for some reason he was really funny. But eventually that went as well. But what I realized was that, you know, there is this kind of shifting, fluttering essence, you know, the sort of butterfly in Zhuangzi'yi that can't be caught by any of these concepts that we try to place on it. And it's only when you very attached to somebody and watch them go through a transformation like this that you realize that. And then I think I thought about it with respect to myself. There are so many things that I'm afraid of losing because I feel like they make me fundamentally who I am. But what are we really fundamentally? You know, do these things really define who we are? People have strokes, say, and their personality traits change, even these big five traits, apparently. So I've heard. I'm not a clinical psychologist, but that's what I've read. But I can imagine that if you're in the right sort of relationship to somebody and you treat them with a certain degree of love and openness, you can still see their post-change self as continuous. It's a horribly tragic thing to happen. You know, I think people who kind of have partners who go through these sorts of transformations, I can't really imagine what it would be like. Mm-hmm. But what I do know is that the love remains somehow. And if the love remains, then the relata of the love must remain. You know, the people must still be there.
When I read your book, one of the first questions that popped to my mind was, you know, when let's say someone has a one-night stand or someone has a situationship, and it really comforts people when we define something, you know, referring to your the story of Hundun. There is something that's limiting about describing something like a relationship, but also there is something that comforts us. We know that we are that's why people get married, I think. Like, yeah. It brings us a sort of comfort to define something and get into that structure. Even though if it's limiting, we want to be in that limiting accommodation. So how can we reconcile our desire to define relationships or ourselves or others with this more free-flowing idea of non-identity?
Yeah, that is a fundamental question, because it's absolutely right that not even just giving things names often is so important in coping with the world. I guess a lot of what therapists do is just help people to put labels, names onto things that otherwise we're at the mercy of. The philosopher R.G. Collingwood said, our feelings overcome us until we put a name on them. And it's true. Your fear is overwhelming until you consciously think to yourself, oh, this is fear. That's what I'm experiencing right now. I'm experiencing fear. Your romantic life just feels kind of completely overwhelming and all-consuming, and then you have this insight like, oh, I'm in a situationship or whatever. And so having this word is comforting, and not only comforting, somehow empowering. And I think that that's true. That is the way that we navigate the world, without being able to put names to things. They feel wild and threatening and chaotic. But the danger, of course, is when you seal things up so tightly in these concepts, names, boxes, that you don't see the things anymore. You only see the labels. That's the problem. Of course, there isn't such a thing as situationship. Every individual human relationship is something unique and distinct, and simply treating them like that without having concepts to put on them would be impossible. It would be overwhelming. The world would be a buzzing, blooming confusion, and you wouldn't know what to do. But reducing, completely reducing the things is where the danger lies. So I think that the trancer has all these images of kind of, dancing with these concepts, of kind of playing with words, where, yes, you do have to put the labels on the things, you do have to tame the world that you see around it, but you kind of are always ready to move things around a bit. You place the labels lightly so that, things can shake them off very easily, and then you put a new label on. I think that's the game.
I think, yes, we are, there is an imbalance between, at the moment, we have maybe too many labels. And I think a counter argument like yours is much needed. Although maybe we're probably not going to get rid of labels or definitions anytime soon.
Absolutely not. No.
We can look at it in a different way.
Can I say one other thing about that, actually? Because I think that, maybe part of the problem that we have, especially within the sort of broadly Western, let's say, way of thinking, is that it's generally separated into this dichotomy that either you kind of retreat in mystical silence. That's okay, I understand that language does violence to the world, so I'll just waggle my finger like Cratylus. That's the figure you have. But I think that in the trancer, it's interesting because you have these sorts of concerns, but you're never forced into this hard dichotomy between, well, either you stay the way that you are or you retreat from language altogether. Instead, you have this new kind of paradoxical attitude, which is summed up in the story that of the fishnets. It says, words are like nets, that they catch the fish, but once you catch the fish, you don't need the net anymore. And then trancer says, somebody who was truly in line with the way would have only the fish and no need of the nets. They would have got beyond words. I want to meet someone who's got beyond words so that I can have a few words with him. So it's a kind of direct acknowledgement of the paradox. It's like, no, you can't retreat from language, but you can't sort of get trapped in it either. You have to sort of dance.
That idea also resonates with Lacan.
I wondered if you were going to say that, actually. Yeah.
Okay, cool. By the way, do you know Chinese? The way you pronounce Zhuangziyi is like...
I'm learning. Yeah, I am. It's been a long...
Can you say it again? I keep saying Zhuangziyi like this.
Well, it's trancer is how... But, that would be if the characters were pronounced sort of a bit like modern Mandarin. In fact, I think characters back then were pronounced in a completely different way. So I'm not sure some people say it would have been closer to Cantonese, where I think it's Zhuangzi'yi. So anyway.
The first time I heard it, I thought you were talking about Chaucer. Like,
oh, right. Oh, sorry. Yeah. No.
mentioned him in his book. Then it made sense to me. Do you want to know my answer to the clinical psychologist?
Please. Yeah.
I said, even if there's a stable identity, I think it's best that we don't know about it. Like, I don't believe in this introspection, know thyself kind of discourse. I don't buy into this propaganda for some reason. And clinical psychologists cannot convince me so far, at least.
Yeah, there's something Lacanian about that as well, so I like that.
Yeah. Okay. I think, my follow-up question was going to be like, maybe the problem is not the stable traits, but our attachment to them and our attachment to our labels and so on. I made an interview with a psychiatrist called Sami Tamimi. He's an Iraqi English psychiatrist. And I really liked his approach to psychiatry as well. And he was born in Iraq and then moved to England. So I think living in different cultures, your case also proves my point. Living in different cultures really gives a person perspective on how, there are different challenging epistemic claims about what right is, wrong is, or identities are. So I think that's why you could think outside of the box of this analytical, categorical way of seeing things. Okay, these are the end of my questions, Alex. Thank you so much for joining my interview. It was a true pleasure to have you and speak to you a little bit more about your book. Also, I'm curious, like, how do you integrate this to your everyday life? Do you have the way that you interact with other people, or the way you see yourself?
I'm trying. Yeah, I'm trying. I mean, aware of the paradox that I don't want to make this into an identity for myself, but I have, since writing it, it's happened very naturally that because people have read this book, I have these kind of meaningful interactions of a kind that I didn't have so often before. I mean, this one is a case in point. And I'm trying to let it affect everything, the way that I teach, the way that I kind of live. But it's very difficult. As I say in the end of the book, I want to make this very clear. I am not, this is not a self-help book where I sort of say I have solved some problem in myself. It's very much diagnosing a problem that I find completely in myself. I don't think that I'm. I class myself as among the patients, not the doctor here. So yeah, but I'm trying. And well, thank you so much for inviting me on as well. I really enjoyed this, and I really appreciate you reading my book and doing the episode about it. So.
No, it was very inspiring, and I already have a tendency to believe in your arguments, I must say. But it was I didn't know about, for example, René Girard at all. So you introduced me to his ideas. I knew a little bit about Taoism, but it was a very interesting, I really liked your style. It was very accessible. I highly recommend your book to anyone who likes to read philosophical books. It's very, very extremely accessible, and it was a joy to read. So thanks for writing it.
Well, thank you so much.